She attended her millionaire ex's mother's funeral, and everyone stared at the child who looked exactly like him. The chapel doors opened at exactly 2:47 p.m., and every conversation stopped. Not because someone important had arrived, the Vance family's wealthy friends had been filing in all morning, but because Shonda Voss walked through those doors holding the hand of a 5-year-old boy who looked exactly like Alistair Vance had looked 30 years ago. Have you ever walked into a room knowing that one glance at your child could destroy everything you've built to protect them? That's exactly what Shonda faced as 200 pairs of eyes turned toward her son, their shock visible even through their grief. Before this day ends, a father will meet a son he never knew existed, and a mother will have to face whether keeping them apart was protection or just fear dressed up as love. But first, thank you for helping Mr. Steele Rich Stories past 2,500 subscribers. Your support means everything. If stories about hidden children and family secrets move you, share this video right now with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that like button and subscribe because this story will change how you think about protecting the ones you love. The marble floors of St. Augustine's Chapel reflected the afternoon light streaming through stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across the faces of Manhattan's elite. Women in designer black dresses worth more than most people's cars dabbed their eyes with handkerchiefs, while men in custom suits checked their phones discreetly, managing million-dollar deals even in mourning. The air smelled of white lilies and expensive perfume, the kind of gathering where grief itself seemed rehearsed and properly dressed. "Mama, why is everybody looking at us?" The child's voice carried in the sudden quiet, his small hand tightening around Shonda's fingers. She knelt beside him, straightening his clip-on tie, the best she could afford from Target, bought yesterday when she'd made the decision to come. "People are sad today, baby. Sometimes when grown-ups are sad, they look around more. It helps them feel less alone." The lie came easily, practiced from 5 years of similar questions. "Why don't I have a daddy? Why don't we visit Grandma? Why do you cry sometimes when you think I'm sleeping?" Each question required careful navigation between truth and protection, between what a child deserved to know and what might hurt them to learn too young. At the front of the chapel, Lorena Vance's portrait stood surrounded by white roses, thousands of dollars worth of flowers that would be thrown away tomorrow. The photograph showed her at 60, her silver hair perfectly styled, wearing the pearl necklace she never took off, her smile warm despite the formal pose. That smile had been real once, years ago, when she'd found Shonda crying in the Vance estate's kitchen after another fight with Alistair's father about her unsuitable presence in their son's life. "You have a good heart, dear," Lorena had said that day, pressing a cup of tea into Shonda's shaking hands. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Not even my husband." That memory had brought Shonda here today, despite every instinct screaming at her to stay away. Lorena deserved a goodbye from someone who remembered her kindness, not just her money. Alistair Vance stood in the front row, his shoulders rigid beneath a black suit that probably cost more than Shonda made in 3 months. Even from behind, even after 5 years, she knew every line of those shoulders, had traced them with her fingers when they were both 22, and stupid enough to think love could overcome bank accounts and family expectations. His dark hair was shorter now, touched with premature grey at the temples, stress from running his father's company, no doubt. When he turned his head slightly to speak with someone, she caught his profile, the strong jaw she'd kissed 1,000 times, the straight nose her son had inherited, the mouth that used to smile so easily when they were alone. "Is that Shonda Voss?" The whisper came from 3 rows behind them, just loud enough to carry. "Can't be. She disappeared years ago." "No, that's definitely her. I remember her from that charity gala, the one where Roland Vance almost had security escort her out. But look at the boy. Oh my God, he looks just like..." "Shh, whispers spread like ripples across water, each person noticing what couldn't be ignored. The child's unusual eyes, the exact shade that ran through the Vance family line. His dark hair that curled slightly at the ends, just like Alistair's had before he started using whatever expensive product kept it perfectly straight. The shape of his face, still soft with childhood, but showing the bones that would one day make him heartbreakingly handsome like his father. Shonda kept walking, her sensible flat silent on the thick carpet runner between the pews. She'd chosen these shoes deliberately, nothing that would click and draw more attention. Her dress was simple black cotton from 2 years ago, appropriate but forgettable. She'd pulled her hair into a low bun, no jewelry, except tiny pearl earrings that Lorena had given her that last Christmas, before everything fell apart. The plan was simple: sit in the back, pay respects, leave before the reception. No conversations, no confrontations, no dramatic revelations. Her son deserved to grow up without the weight of the Vance name and all its expectations. She'd made that choice 5 years ago when she'd packed everything she owned into 2 suitcases and left New York, pregnant and terrified, but certain she was doing the right thing. Then Alistair turned around. Maybe someone had whispered to him, or maybe he'd felt her presence the way she always felt his. That electric awareness that had drawn them together at that college party 7 years ago, when he was slumming with friends and she was catering to pay tuition. Their eyes met across 20 feet of chapel, and time seemed to pause. His face went through a series of transformations so quick she might have missed them if she hadn't spent years memorizing every expression. First came confusion, why would she be here? Then recognition, his eyes widening as they confirmed what his mind was processing. Then his gaze dropped to the child beside her, and everything changed. The confusion became disbelief. He blinked hard, as if the boy might disappear, might become some other child who just happened to look like Vance. But the child remained devastatingly real, fidgeting with the funeral program Shonda had given him to keep his hands busy, unaware that his biological father was seeing him for the first time. Disbelief shifted to anger, the kind that made Alistair's jaw clench and his hands form fists at his sides. How dare she show up here? How dare she bring this child, his child, to his mother's funeral? How dare she have hidden this from him? But the anger couldn't hold. It melted into something raw, more vulnerable, pain. The kind that comes from realizing you've missed 5 years of your son's life. First words, first steps, first day of school, bedtime stories and scraped knees and teaching him to ride a bike. All of it gone, irretrievable, because the woman you once loved decided you didn't deserve to know. Roland Vance, Alistair's father, noticed his son's distraction and followed his gaze. The old man's reaction was subtler but no less intense, a tightening around his eyes, a slight straightening of his already perfect posture. He placed a warning hand on Alistair's arm, his lips barely moving as he said something that looked like "not here, not now." Alistair's struggle was visible, every muscle tensing as he fought between what he wanted to do and what the situation demanded. For a moment, Shonda thought he might ignore his father, might stride down that aisle and demand answers in front of everyone. Their entire past balanced on that moment. Late nights in his dorm room talking about changing the world, sneaking into the Vance Estates pool after midnight, the fight when Roland had offered her $50,000 to disappear, the morning she'd thrown her engagement ring at him and walked out. She remembered the last thing he'd said to her, "If you leave now, don't come back. I won't chase you, Shonda. I'm done fighting for us." She'd been so hurt, so tired of being treated like a gold digger by his family, so scared of raising a child in that toxic environment that she'd taken him at his word. The pregnancy test in her purse had stayed hidden, 2 pink lines that changed everything but that he'd never known about. Now their son stood between them, literally and figuratively, living proof of a love that had burned too bright and burned out too fast. leaving scars neither of them had properly healed. The child looked up at his mother, sensing the tension without understanding it, and Shonda made herself breathe normally, made herself continue toward the back pew, as if her entire world hadn't just shifted on its axis. She could feel Alistair's eyes following them, burning with questions that would have to wait until after his mother was properly mourned and buried. The service will start soon. Prayers would be said, hymns would be sung, and somewhere between the eulogy and the final blessing, she would have to decide whether to run again or finally face what she'd been running from all these years. The boy tugged at her hand as they slid into a back pew. "Mama, who was that man staring at us?" "Just someone I used to know, sweetheart. Someone from a long time ago." He looked sad. Like really, really sad. "Everyone here is sad today, baby. That's what funerals are, places where people come together to be sad about losing someone they loved. Did you love the lady in the picture?" Shonda looked at Lorena's portrait at the front of the chapel, that kind face frozen in time, and felt tears prick her eyes. "I did. She was very good to me once, when I needed someone to be kind. Then I'm glad we came to say goodbye, even if everyone is staring." Out of the mouths of children, Shonda thought, came the simplest truths. She wrapped her arm around her son and pulled him close, breathing in the scent of the discount shampoo she used on his hair, the faint smell of the peanut butter sandwich he'd had for lunch, all the small details that made up their life together, a life she'd built alone by choice, to protect him from the very people filling this chapel. But as the organ music began and the service started, as Alistair took his place beside his father, and the minister began speaking about eternal rest and God's mercy, Shonda wondered if she'd been protecting her son at all, or if she'd just been protecting herself from having to share him with the man who'd broken her heart and the family who'd never thought she was good enough. The answer, she suspected, was somewhere in between, and before this day ended, she'd have to face it. 7 years before that funeral, before the child existed, before everything fell apart, Shonda Voss was just another exhausted college student trying to balance textbooks with survival. The campus library stayed open until 2 a.m., and she'd claimed a corner table as her own, close enough to the outlet to charge her ancient laptop, far enough from the main entrance that no one bothered her when she ate the peanut butter sandwiches that served as dinner most nights. She worked the morning shift at campus grounds, the overpriced coffee shop where students ordered $7 lattes without blinking. Her scholarship covered tuition but nothing else, so she poured drinks for kids who spent more on coffee in a week than she spent on groceries in a month. Between shifts, she studied architecture, losing herself in blueprints and building codes, dreaming of designing homes for people who'd never have to choose between rent and textbooks. It was a Tuesday night in October when Alistair Vance first approached her table. She'd seen him around campus. Everyone knew the Vance heir, with his easy confidence and designer everything. But she'd never expected him to stop at her table, looking surprisingly desperate. "Hey, I'm really sorry to bother you, but my laptop just died and I have a presentation due at 8 tomorrow morning. Could I possibly borrow your charger for like 20 minutes? I'll bring it right back, I swear." Shonda looked up from her structural engineering textbook, taking in his expensive watch and perfectly styled hair. "You look like someone who owns a charger store. How do you not have a backup?" Instead of being offended, he laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face from handsome to approachable. "Fair point. I usually do, but I lent it to someone and forgot to get it back. I'm Alistair, by the way. I know who you are." She unplugged her charger and handed it over. 20 minutes. I'm timing you. You're Shonda from campus grounds, right? You make that thing with the extra shot and the cinnamon that my roommate won't shut up about. Your roommate has good taste and too much money." He laughed again, taking the charger. "Also fair. Mind if I sit here?" The outlets on the other side don't work. That was how it started, with a borrowed charger and gentle teasing that neither expected to continue. But Alistair kept coming back. First, he returned the charger exactly 20 minutes later with a caramel macchiato from campus grounds, interest payment he'd called it. Then he started showing up during her study sessions, sometimes with his charger, sometimes forgetting it again. He'd bring her coffee that she hadn't asked for but somehow always needed, remembering that she liked an extra shot of espresso and just a touch of caramel, not too sweet. Their conversations started surface-level classes, professors, campus gossip. But late at night, when the library emptied except for the truly desperate, their walls came down. Alistair talked about the weight of being Roland Vance's only son, how every choice he made was measured against company stock prices and family legacy. "My father has my entire life mapped out," he told her one November night, spinning his pen between his fingers. Graduate summa cum laude, Harvard MBA, take over the real estate division by 30, CEO by 40. Marriage to someone from the right family, somewhere in there. 2 kids to carry on the name. "Sounds suffocating," Shonda said, not looking up from her sketches. "It is. What about you? What's your map?" She set down her pencil, considering. Graduate without drowning in debt. Get a job at a firm that actually builds things for normal people, not just penthouse suites. Maybe start my own company one day, designing affordable housing that doesn't look like concrete boxes. Help my mom retire before her knees give out completely from cleaning offices. Your mom cleans offices? Your family's offices, actually. 3rd floor of the Vance building, Tuesday and Thursday nights. At least she did until last month, when she switched to a different company. Better pay, slightly better hours. He went quiet at that, processing this connection he'd never considered. His mother had probably emptied his father's trash, while Alistair sat in board meetings planning developments that would price people like her out of their neighborhoods. "Does that weird you out?" Shonda asked, watching his face carefully. "No. Maybe it should, but it doesn't. It makes me respect you more, actually. You're here on merit, not because your last name opened doors." Their relationship deepened through these moments of honesty. Shonda told him about taking 3 buses to get to campus because she couldn't afford parking, about choosing classes based on which professors didn't require expensive textbooks, about the guidance counselor who told her not to aim too high because people like her rarely made it in architecture. Alistair shared his own struggles, different but real. The panic attacks before board meetings where his father would critique every word, the loneliness of being surrounded by people who only saw dollar signs when they looked at him, the engagement his parents were already planning with the daughter of another real estate dynasty, a woman he'd met twice and felt nothing for. By December, they were inseparable. He'd walk her to a bus stop after the library closed, sometimes riding with her just to spend an extra 40 minutes together. She taught him to appreciate $2 street tacos and showed him the beauty in buildings that weren't trying to scrape the sky. He introduced her to sushi that cost more than her weekly food budget and took her to the observation deck of his family's tallest building, showing her the city spread out like a circuit board of lights. "We're wrong for each other on paper," Shonda said one night, her head on his shoulder as they looked out at the city. "Good thing I've never liked doing what looks right on paper," he replied, kissing the top of her head. The first time Shonda met Lorena Vance was at the family's estate in Westchester, 3 months after that first borrowed charger. Alistair had insisted his mother wanted to meet her, though Shonda suspected it was more about inspection than invitation. The house, if you could call something with 16 bedrooms a house, sat on 5 acres of perfectly maintained grounds. The driveway alone was longer than her entire street back home. "Stop fidgeting," Alistair said as they walked up the marble steps. "She's going to love you. Your mother is going to take one look at my department store dress and know exactly where I don't belong. You belong wherever you want to belong. Easy for him to say. The housekeeper who answered the door wore clothes nicer than Shonda's best outfit. The foyer was bigger than her entire apartment, with a chandelier that probably cost more than her mother made in 5 years. Every surface gleamed with the kind of clean that came from hired help, not Saturday morning chores. Lorena Vance appeared like she'd been painted into the scene. Silver hair perfectly coiffed, wearing casual clothes that whispered rather than shouted their price tags. Movements graceful in the way of people who'd never had to rush for anything. "You must be Shonda," she said, her voice warm but careful. "Alistair has told me so much about you." The formal dining room was set for lunch with china that looked too delicate to actually use. Shonda sat carefully, terrified of breaking something worth more than her tuition. The conversation stayed polite and surface level until Lorena suddenly said, "Would you like to see the kitchen? I find formal dining rooms suffocating, don't you?" The kitchen, despite being the size of most people's entire homes, felt more human. Lorena dismissed the staff and made tea herself, her movements practiced and fond. "Tell me something about yourself that has nothing to do with my son," Lorena said, setting a cup in front of Shonda. Real china, but somehow less intimidating without the dining room's formality. "I sketch buildings," Shonda said, surprising herself with honesty. "Not just for my classes, I mean everywhere. I see structures in everything. The way light hits a fire escape, how shadows make ordinary buildings look extraordinary at sunset. I have notebooks full of drawings of places I want to design someday. May I see them?" Shonda pulled her sketchbook from her bag, embarrassed by its worn cover and coffee stains, but Lorena handled it like something precious, studying each page carefully. "This one," she said, stopping at a design for low-income housing that managed to include private gardens. "You have an eye for seeing what people need, not just what they can afford. Don't let life talk you out of using that gift. Most people lack vision. You don't. That's worth more than the right background." They spent 2 hours in that kitchen talking about art and buildings and the way cities could be more than just concrete and profit. Lorena showed her photos from her own youth, before Roland, before the money, when she'd wanted to be a painter. "I gave it up for all this," she said, gesturing vaguely at the estate. "Some days I wonder if I made the right choice. Don't let anyone make that choice for you, Shonda. Not even my son." Roland Vance arrived home as they were leaving the kitchen. Shonda recognized him from business magazines, silver fox handsome, with eyes that calculated property values in every glance. His suit probably cost more than her mother's annual salary. "You must be Alistair's friend from school," he said, the word friend carrying weight that suggested he knew exactly what she really was. His handshake was brief, professional, and dismissive. "Shonda is studying architecture, Roland," Lorena said, something protective in her tone. "How interesting. Such a challenging field, especially for someone without connections." His smile never wavered, but the message was clear: "You don't belong here." "Shonda's brilliant, Dad. Top of her class," Alistair said, his arm finding her waist. "Intelligence is certainly important, though success often requires more than just grades, doesn't it? The right partnerships, the right background. I'm sure you understand, Miss Voss." The way he said her last name made it clear he'd already researched her, knew about her mother's cleaning jobs, her father who'd left when she was 3, the apartment in the part of town his company was planning to gentrify. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Vance," Shonda replied, keeping her voice steady despite the burning in her chest. The interaction lasted maybe 3 minutes, but it set the tone for everything that followed. Roland Vance had decided she was temporary, a phase his son would outgrow, the kind of mistake young men made before settling into their real lives with suitable wives who brought the right names and connections. But for a while, none of that mattered. Spring arrived, and their relationship bloomed with it. Shonda's tiny studio apartment became their sanctuary, where Alistair could be more than just the Vance heir. They'd sit on her fire escape, sharing Chinese takeout from containers, planning a future that seemed possible in those moments. "When you have your own firm," Alistair would say, "I'll be your first investor." "With what money?" "I thought you were going to give it all away and become a teacher," she'd tease back, referring to one of his 3 a.m. confessions about what he'd do if the family name didn't weigh him down. They studied together for finals, her architectural models taking over his expensive apartment, while his business textbooks cluttered her tiny table. She taught him to see buildings as more than investments, as homes, as dreams, as spaces where lives unfolded. He taught her that. Having money didn't automatically make someone soulless. That privilege could be acknowledged and used for good. On her birthday, instead of expensive jewelry she couldn't wear anywhere, he gave her a set of professional drafting tools, the kind she'd been saving for months to afford. "For the buildings you're going to design, that'll make the Vance Towers look like amateur hour," he'd said. They spent summer afternoons in Central Park, sketching while he read business proposals, occasionally looking up to watch her work. The way her forehead creased when she concentrated, how she bit her lip when getting the perspective just right. He memorized all of it, though neither knew he was storing memories for years of absence ahead. Those were the days when love felt like enough, when Shonda could almost believe she belonged in his world, and Alistair could almost believe he could leave it for hers. They existed in a bubble where Roland's disapproval and society's expectations couldn't reach them, where a girl from the wrong side of the tracks and a boy with too much money could write their own story. She kept the engagement ring he gave her that September in its box for 3 days before wearing it, terrified and thrilled in equal measure. It wasn't ostentatious, he knew her well enough for that. Just a simple band with a modest diamond, the kind of ring a young architect might buy herself someday. "I want to do this right," he'd said, down on one knee in her tiny apartment rather than some fancy restaurant. "I want to wake up next to you in 50 years, still arguing about whether that building is Art Deco or Art Nouveau." She'd said yes, of course. Said yes to him and to the future they'd planned, and to the belief that love could overcome anything, even Roland Vance's checkbook and society's expectations. For exactly 2 months, she wore that ring and believed in their future. Until the morning she stood outside his apartment door and heard a conversation that shattered every dream they'd built together. The bathroom in Shonda's studio apartment was barely big enough to turn around in, but on that November morning, it felt like the walls were closing in entirely. She sat on the closed toilet lid, holding the 3rd pregnancy test she'd taken that week, all showing the same result, 2 pink lines that changed everything. Her hands shook as she set the test on the sink's edge, next to the other 2, as if seeing them together might change what they meant. Outside, city traffic continued its morning rush, car horns and sirens and life moving forward, while hers stood absolutely still. She was 23 years old, 6 months from graduating, engaged to a man whose father hated her, and now carrying a baby that would either bridge their 2 worlds or destroy any chance of belonging in either. Her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, still flat, showing no sign of life growing inside. 1,000 scenarios ran through her mind, telling Alistair, seeing his face light up or fall, watching Roland's calculated disapproval turn into active warfare. But underneath the fear, something else stirred, a fierce, protective love for this collection of cells that would become a person. "I don't know how this is going to work," she whispered to her belly, "but I promise you this. You will never be anyone's dirty secret. You will never wonder if you're wanted. And you will never, ever be just tolerated in your own family." She thought about Alistair's eyes, that unusual shade that photographers always commented on, and wondered if their child would inherit them. She imagined a little boy with Alistair's stubborn chin and her determination, or a girl with her creativity and his laugh. The image was so clear it hurt, This hypothetical child who would be perfect and loved and never have to choose between their parents' worlds because they'd create a new one together. The engagement ring on her finger caught the harsh bathroom light. 2 months of wearing it, and it still felt foreign, like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. But the baby felt real in a way nothing else had. This was hers, theirs, a piece of both of them that couldn't be bought off or intimidated away. She stood up, legs steadier now, and wrapped the tests in toilet paper before throwing them in the trash. She'd tell Alistair tonight. He'd been working late all week, something about a new development his father was pushing through, but she couldn't wait any longer. He deserved to know. They'd figure out the rest together. That's what people in love did, right? By 7 that evening, Shonda stood outside Alistair's condo building, November wind cutting through her coat. She'd changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on the green dress he'd bought her for her birthday. The one that made her eyes look brighter, he'd said. Her hand kept moving to a purse where she'd put the most recent pregnancy test, wrapped in tissue like some fragile gift. The doorman recognized her by now, waving her through with a smile. "Mr. Vance is in, Miss Voss. Should I call up?" "No, thank you, David. He's expecting me," she lied, wanting to surprise him. She'd practiced her words on the subway ride. Over. "I have news. Big news. Life-changing news." Each version sounded either too dramatic or too casual for announcing you were carrying someone's child. The private elevator to the penthouse hummed quietly as it rose 23 floors. She watched the city shrink below through the glass walls, lights beginning to twinkle as evening settled over Manhattan. This view still amazed her. The whole world spread out like possibility itself. Their child would grow up seeing this, taking for granted what she'd worked so hard just to glimpse. The elevator opened directly into Alistair's apartment, another rich person thing she'd never get used to. Usually music would be playing, or she'd hear him on a conference call, using his business voice that was nothing like how he spoke to her. But tonight, she heard something else, voices, multiple, and one of them made her stomach drop. Roland Vance was here. She should have announced herself, should have called out to let them know she'd arrived. But something in Roland's tone stopped her, that particular mixture of authority and threat that powerful men perfected. The apartment's open design meant voices carried from the living room to the foyer. She stood frozen by the elevator, close enough to hear but hidden from view. "Let me be absolutely clear, son." Roland's voice cut through the space like a blade through silk. "The board meets next month to confirm your position as Executive Vice President of Development. This is not a given, it's a test. They're watching you, watching us, watching for any sign that you're not ready for real responsibility." "I understand, Dad." Alistair sounded tired, the way he did after their fights about his family. "Do you? Because your recent choices suggest otherwise. This girl, Shonda. Her name is Shonda, and she's my fiancée. She's a distraction you can't afford. The Hendersons' daughter is back from Switzerland. Cambridge MBA, her father owns the 3rd largest commercial real estate firm in the country. That's the kind of alliance that builds empires. I'm not marrying someone for their father's portfolio." Roland's laugh was cold, practiced. "You think this is about marriage? This is about survival. Our competitors are circling, waiting for any weakness. You show up to the board meeting with that girl, a nobody from nowhere, with nothing to offer but a pretty face and ambitious dreams she'll never achieve, and they'll eat you alive. She's graduating top of her class. She's brilliant. She's pregnant, isn't she?" The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Shonda's hand flew to her stomach protectively, even though there was no way Roland could know. Unless, had Alistair already told him? But no, she heard genuine confusion in Alistair's response. "What? No, why would you even—" "Because I've seen this before. These girls get their hooks in with sex and sentiment, then suddenly there's a baby and you're trapped. Tell me truthfully, if she showed up tomorrow claiming to carry your child, what would you do? Another silence, longer this time. Shonda pressed herself against the wall, needing to hear his answer, needing him to defend their love, their future, their unborn child he didn't even know about yet. I will handle it. Handle it how? I don't know, Dad. She's not pregnant. This is hypothetical. Nothing is hypothetical when you're Vance. Every scenario needs a plan. So I'll tell you what you do. You'd send her to Dr. Morrison's clinic upstate. Discreet, professional, problem solved. Or if she insisted on keeping it, there are documents, custody agreements, financial settlements. The child would be provided for, naturally, but at a distance. No claims on the family name, no disruption to your real life. My real life includes Shonda. For now. But when you're running this company, when you're married to someone who actually strengthens your position instead of weakening it, when you have legitimate heirs with the right bloodlines, you'll thank me for this conversation. You're asking me to choose. I'm telling you the choice has already been made. You can either accept it gracefully or learn the hard way that fighting me means losing everything. Your position, your inheritance, your future. I've built this empire for you, but I can just as easily hand it to your cousin Michael. He's been quite eager lately, and his engagement to the senator's daughter certainly helps his case. You wouldn't. Try me. End it with the girl by month's end, or I'll end your career before it starts. No dramatic scenes, no surprise pregnancies, no scandals. Just a clean break and a return to the path we've set for you. Shonda couldn't listen anymore. Her legs moved without conscious thought, carrying her back to the elevator. She pressed the button with shaking fingers, praying it would arrive before anyone discovered her. The word handle echoed in her mind, such a cold corporate term for what should have been joy. I would handle it. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime that sounded like an ending. She stepped inside, catching one last fragment of conversation. I understand, Dad, Alistair was saying. I'll handle everything. The descent felt endless. 23 floors of processing what she'd heard, of understanding that the fairy tale she'd let herself believe was just that, a story for children who didn't know how the world really worked. By the time she reached the lobby, her face was composed enough that David simply wished her a good evening, not noticing her world had just shattered. The November wind felt colder now, cutting through her coat and dress straight to her bones. She walked without direction, her feet carrying her automatically while her mind replayed every word. These girls get their hooks in, problem solved, legitimate heirs with the right bloodlines. Her hand found her stomach again, protective and possessive. Her child, their child, reduced to a problem requiring a solution, a scandal to be avoided, an inconvenience to be handled. And Alistair, the man who'd promised to love her forever, who'd knelt in her tiny apartment and sworn they'd build a life together. He'd said he understood. He'd said he would handle it. The pregnancy test in her purse felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She stopped at a trash can on the corner, pulling it out and staring at those 2 pink lines that had seemed like a beginning just hours ago. Now they looked like prison bars, trapping her between impossible choices. But as she stood there in the cold, one truth crystallized with absolute clarity. She would not let her child become Roland Vance's problem to solve. She would not watch Alistair choose his father's approval over their baby's existence. She would not raise this child in a family that saw them as a threat rather than a gift. She put the test back in her purse and started walking toward the subway. By the time she reached her apartment, she'd made her decision. By morning, she'd start planning her escape. She didn't answer Alistair's calls that night or the next morning. By afternoon, he was at her door, knocking with increasing urgency. Shonda, I know you're in there. Your neighbor said she saw you come home. Please, just talk to me. She stood on the other side of the door. her hand on the chain lock, fighting between the urge to let him in and the need to protect herself and her baby from what she'd heard. "We need to talk," he said, his voice muffled through the door. "David said you came by last night but left without coming up. What's going on?" She opened the door but left the chain on, showing only a sliver of her face. "I heard you talking to your father." His face went through several expressions: confusion, realization, then something that looked like panic. "Shonda, let me in. Let me explain." "Explain what? How are you going to handle me? How I'm a distraction you can't afford? You don't understand the context. I understand enough. Answer one question for me, Alistair. Just one, and be honest. Anything. If I were pregnant, hypothetically, would you tell your father?" The question hung between them like a loaded weapon. She watched his face, saw him trying to formulate the right answer, the careful answer, the answer that would get her to open the door. But she didn't want to be careful. She wanted the truth. We would need to discuss the timing. The timing. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Not "I'd be thrilled" or "we'd figure it out together." The timing, that's not what I meant. You're twisting my words, I'm repeating them. You told your father you understood. You told him you'd handle everything, because I knew that's what he needed to hear. If I'd fought him right then, you would have had to actually fight for us, for me, for the family we talked about having. When will it be certain enough for you? When your father approves? When you've married whoever he picks and I'm what? Your secret on the side? That's not fair. No, what's not fair is that I actually believed you when you said our love was stronger than your family's money. His face hardened, the Vance temper she'd seen him direct at business rivals but never at her. "So that's it? You eavesdrop on a private conversation, jump to conclusions, and now you're ending us." "I didn't jump to anything. I heard your father lay out exactly what he expects, and I heard you agree to it. I never said I'd end things with you. You're being dramatic, running away instead of talking this through like adults. Adults don't let their fathers dictate who they love. Easy for you to say. You don't have anything to lose." The words hit like a physical blow. She pulled the chain lock off and opened the door fully, needing him to see her completely as she said this. "You're right. I don't have a fortune to lose or a family name to protect. All I have is my self-respect and the knowledge that I deserve someone who would choose me without hesitation, without timing discussions, without needing to handle me. Take your ring back." She pulled the engagement ring off her finger and held it out. He didn't take it. "Keep it. Sell it if you need to. I'm not taking it back because this isn't over." "Yes, it is. Go be the son your father wants. Marry someone with the right bloodline. Have legitimate heirs. Build your empire. Just do it without me. If you walk away now, I won't chase you. I'm done fighting for someone who won't fight for us." Those words, the finality of them, almost broke her resolve. Almost made her tell him about the baby, about the test in her purse, about the future they'd already created together. But then she remembered his hesitation, his careful words, his promise to handle everything. "Then don't chase me," she said, closing the door in his face. She listened to him stand there for a long time, heard him start to knock again, then stop. Heard him lean against the door, heard what might have been a sob or just heavy breathing. Finally she heard his footsteps retreating down the hall, the elevator ding, and then silence. Only then did she let herself cry, sliding down the door to sit on the floor, one hand on her still flat stomach, the other pressed to her mouth to muffle the sounds of her breaking heart. 3 weeks later, Shonda's apartment was empty except for the furniture that came with it. She'd sold everything that wouldn't fit in 2 suitcases, including the engagement ring, which gave her enough money to start over somewhere else. She couldn't stay in New York. Too many memories, too much chance of running into Alistair or his family, too easy for Roland to find her if he decided she was a threat worth eliminating. Her mother had cried when she'd explained she was leaving, though Shonda kept the pregnancy hidden for now. Denise Voss had raised a practical daughter, and she understood running when staying meant drowning. "If you need to go, you go," she'd said, pressing emergency money into Shonda's hand that she couldn't afford to give. "But you call me every week, you hear? And when you're ready to tell me what you're really running from, I'll be here." Shonda had considered several cities: Boston, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., anywhere far enough to make casual discovery unlikely, but close enough to get back if her mother needed her. She'd chosen Philadelphia because a small architecture firm there had offered her an entry-level position based on her portfolio alone, no background check beyond verifying her degree. The pay was modest, the projects unglamorous, but it was a start. More importantly, it was anonymous. The hardest goodbye was to Marisol Carter, her friend from school who'd gotten her through calculus and structural engineering. They sat in their favorite coffee shop, not campus grounds, never there anymore, while Shonda explained what she could without explaining everything. "This is about Vance, isn't it?" Marisol wasn't asking. "Girl, everyone could see how you two looked at each other. What happened? His family happened. His father happened. Reality happened." Shonda stirred her coffee without drinking it. "I can't stay here, Marisol. I need distance to figure out my next steps. Philadelphia isn't that far. I can visit, right? Maybe, eventually. But I need you to promise me something. If anyone asks where I went, especially anyone with money and lawyers, you haven't heard from me. You don't know where I am." Marisol grabbed her hands across the table, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Shonda, are you in trouble? Does he know?" "He doesn't know anything, and I need to keep it that way. Just for a while. Just until I figure things out. You know I've got your back. Always. But promise me you'll stay in touch. Even if it's just a text every few weeks so I know you're okay. I promise." They hugged goodbye on the sidewalk outside, both crying, both pretending they weren't. Shonda got on the subway heading to Port Authority, 2 suitcases and a bus ticket to Philadelphia, her only possessions. The pregnancy was starting to show if you knew what to look for: a slight thickening of her waist, a fullness to her face. In a few more weeks it would be obvious. On the bus, watching New York disappear in the rearview window, she placed one hand on her belly and made a silent promise. "We're going to be okay, baby. I'm going to build us a life where you're wanted and loved and never, ever have to wonder if you're good enough. Just you and me against the world." She believed it too at that moment, believed she could do this alone, could raise a child and build a career, and never need Alistair Vance or his family's money or approval. She believed that running was protecting her baby, not depriving them of a father. She believed a lot of things on that bus ride to Philadelphia. Time would teach her which beliefs were wisdom and which were just fear wearing a different mask. Think about this moment, Shonda standing outside Alistair's door, hearing that conversation between father and son. If you heard what she heard, would you have run like she did, or would you have confronted him with the truth about the pregnancy? Type run if you think protecting yourself and your child from a hostile family is the right choice, even if it means the father never knows. Type confront if you think he deserved the chance to prove whether he'd choose his child over his father's demands. These impossible choices, between protection and honesty, between safety and completeness, define so many real relationships. Your perspective matters because it helps us understand the different ways people navigate fear and love. If this story is gripping you, if you're feeling the weight of Shonda's decision and Alistair's weakness, hit that like button and share this with someone who understands how complicated family and love can be. Subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories because we're just getting started with this journey of hidden children, broken trust, and the question of whether people truly can change. 5 years had transformed Shonda Voss from an ambitious architecture student into something she'd never planned to be. A single mother who traded blueprints for breakfast shifts, designed software for double shifts, and dreams of building skylines for the reality of building one small life, day by day. Philadelphia had been her home for 18 months, long enough to have the baby, recover, and realize that small city architecture firms paid even less than she'd feared. When her mother's health started declining and Denise needed help she wouldn't ask for, Shonda made the calculated decision to return to New York. Not Manhattan, where memories lived on every corner, but Queens, affordable, anonymous, far enough from the Vance world that casual encounters were unlikely. The alarm went off at 4:45 a.m. every morning in their 2-bedroom apartment. She'd shower quickly, using the bathroom light to avoid waking her son, then dress in her catering uniform. Black pants, white shirt, comfortable shoes that had seen too many miles across hotel ballroom floors. By 5:30, she'd be at her neighbor's apartment next door, gently transferring a still-sleeping child from her arms to the elderly woman's couch. Mrs. Patterson charged half what other sitters did, understanding without words what it meant to struggle, to count every dollar twice before spending it once. She'd lost her own daughter young, and treated Shonda's son with the tenderness of a grandmother grateful for second chances. The catering company van picked her up at 6, and she'd spend the next 10 hours serving food to people who never really saw her. Just another pair of hands offering champagne and canapés at corporate events and upscale weddings. Her feet would ache by noon, her back by 3. But she'd smile and nod and refill glasses, because the tips from these events made the difference between paying rent and paying rent, plus buying her son new shoes when he outgrew his old ones overnight. She'd get home by 5 p.m. most days, sometimes later if there was clean-up overtime available. Mrs. Patterson would have the boy at the kitchen table practicing his letters or coloring while she cooked something that smelled like comfort, usually soup that she'd insist Shonda take a container of, refusing any payment beyond her sitting fee. "Mama?" He'd launch himself at her legs, all 5-year-old energy and unconditional love. His eyes, so much like his father's it sometimes stole her breath, would shine with stories about his day. "Mrs. Patterson taught me how to tie my shoes, and I drew you a picture of a dragon, but it looks more like a weird dog." These were the moments that made everything worth it. When she'd sit at their small table, helping him sound out words in his picture books, his head leaning against her shoulder, smelling like crayons and playground dirt and possibility. When they'd have breakfast for dinner because pancakes were cheap, and he thought eating breakfast at night was the height of rebellion. When they'd build fortresses out of couch cushions and pretend the floor was lava, both of them laughing until their sides hurt. The bedtime routine was sacred, bath time with too many bubbles, 2 stories, and their special goodnight ritual. "I love you to the moon," she'd say, tucking him in. "And back?" he'd ask, even though he knew the answer. And back, times infinity +1, +2, +3. This would continue until one of them said a number so ridiculous they'd both dissolve into giggles. Then she'd kiss his forehead, leave his dinosaur nightlight on, and slip out to the living room, where she'd spend another 2 hours working on freelance drafting projects. Small jobs that barely paid, but kept her skills sharp, kept her connected to the architect she'd once planned to be. The apartment was small but clean, decorated with his artwork and thrift store finds she'd painted to look less worn. The refrigerator was covered in his drawings, wonky houses with too many windows, stick figures labeled me and Mama, sons with sunglasses that he insisted were cool sons, not regular sons. This was their life, careful, structured, held together by routine and determination and the fierce love she had for the boy who'd inherited his father's eyes, but hopefully her strength. Marisol Carter was the only friend from her old life who'd stuck around. Though stuck around wasn't quite accurate, since Shonda had cut contact during her Philadelphia years. When she'd moved back to Queens, she'd reached out tentatively, half expecting anger at the ghosting. But Marisol had just shown up with wine and takeout like no time had passed. "Girl, your feet must be killing you," Marisol said on one visit, watching Shonda soak them in a plastic tub of hot water and Epsom salt. "When's the last time you wore shoes that weren't orthopedic? When's the last time you paid $1,500 in rent for a place with mysterious stains on the ceiling?" Shonda shot back, but she was smiling. "Fair point. But seriously, you can't cater forever. Your brain is too good to waste on remembering who ordered the gluten-free option." "My brain is currently focused on keeping my kid fed, clothed, and happy. Architecture can wait." Marisol watched the boy playing with blocks in the corner, building and rebuilding towers with serious concentration. "He looks just like—" "Don't." Shonda's voice was sharp, protective. "We don't talk about that. It's been 5 years, Shonda. Maybe it's time." "Time for what? To disrupt his life? To introduce him to a family that would either reject him or try to buy him? To reopen wounds that finally stop bleeding? To give him the chance to know where he comes from? He comes from me. That's enough." Marisol never pushed further, but Shonda could see the questions in her eyes every time the boy did something that reminded them both of Alistair. The way he tilted his head when thinking, his surprising stubbornness about seemingly random things, the way he could charm anyone with his smile. The truth was, Shonda saw Alistair in their son every single day, and it was both a gift and a wound that never quite healed. The city wouldn't let her forget Alistair completely, no matter how hard she tried. His face appeared on business magazines at the grocery store checkout. Vance Enterprises announces record profits. His image gazed down from billboards advertising luxury developments she'd never afford, Vance Towers, where excellence reaches higher. Once, she'd been serving at a charity gala when he'd appeared on the massive screens around the room, giving a speech via video link about corporate responsibility and giving back to the community. She'd had to escape to the kitchen, hands shaking as she loaded another tray, while his voice echoed through the speakers talking about building a better future. The other servers had gossiped about him during break. Heard he's engaged to that pharmaceutical heiress. No, they broke up. He's with some senator's daughter now. A man like that could have anyone he wants. Shonda had stayed silent, focusing on folding napkins into perfect triangles, pretending her chest didn't tighten with each mention of his name. The worst was when her son pointed to a billboard near their subway stop, excited because he was learning to read. "Mama, that says Vance, V-A-N-C-E. Her heart had stopped. She'd never told him his middle name, had been saving that conversation for when he was older, when she could explain the complicated truth without crushing his understanding of family. "Good reading, baby. You're getting so good at sounding out words. Is that a building company? They make really tall buildings." "Yes, they do. Very tall ones. Maybe when I grow up I can make tall buildings too." "You can be anything you want to be, sweetheart. Anything at all." But she'd steered them away from that subway stop after that, taking a longer route that added 15 minutes to their commute, but avoided that particular billboard and the questions it might trigger. As her son grew older and more aware, his questions became harder to deflect. "Mom, how come everyone at school has a dad except me?" he'd asked one evening over homework, his pencil tapping against his math workbook. "Not everyone, baby. Remember, Sophia in your class lives with her grandmother. Families come in all shapes, but Sophia knows who her dad is. He just lives in Florida." "Where does my dad live?" "I don't know where he lives now, sweetheart. Did he die?" "No, he didn't die. Then why doesn't he visit?" The question hung in the air like an accusation she couldn't defend against. How could she explain that his father didn't know he existed? that she'd chosen isolation over the risk of him being treated like an unwanted obligation. Sometimes adults make choices that don't make sense to kids. But what matters is that you are so loved. By me, by Mrs. Patterson, by Aunt Marisol. You have so many people who think you're amazing, but not my dad. I think if your dad knew you, he'd think you were amazing too. Then why doesn't he know me? It's complicated, baby. When you're older, I'll explain better. But for now, just know that none of this is your fault, and you are exactly who you're supposed to be. He'd accepted this for now, but she knew harder questions were coming. The older he got, the more he'd need real answers, not gentle redirections. The truth would have to come out eventually. She just hoped she'd find the right words when it did. Sometimes, late at night after he was asleep, she'd pull out her old sketchbook and find the drawings she'd done of buildings she and Alistair had talked about designing together. She'd trace the lines with her finger, remembering the dreams they'd shared, and wonder if she'd made the right choice, or just the safe one. It was a Thursday morning when everything changed. Shonda was setting up for a corporate breakfast, arranging fruit platters in perfect spirals, when someone had left the New York Times on one of the prep tables. She wasn't looking for it. She'd trained herself not to look for anything Vance-related, but the name jumped out from the obituary section like it was printed in neon. Lorena Vance, philanthropist and arts patron, dead at 67. Her hands stilled on the strawberries she'd been placing. Around her, the kitchen continued its morning chaos. Servers rushing, chefs shouting orders, the dishwasher clanging, but all she could hear was her own heartbeat. She picked up the paper with trembling fingers, reading quickly. Lorena Vance, wife of real estate mogul Roland Vance and mother of Alistair Vance, died Tuesday after a brief illness. She was known for her support of emerging artists and her work with literacy programs in underserved communities. Services will be held Saturday at St. Augustine's Chapel, the same chapel where she'd almost married Alistair. The irony wasn't lost on her. Voss, those platters aren't going to arrange themselves. Her supervisor's voice cut through her trance. She folded the obituary section and slipped it into her apron pocket, finishing her shift on autopilot. Lorena was gone, the one person in that family who'd seen her as more than an opportunist, who'd encouraged her dreams instead of dismissing them, who'd made her tea and talked about art and life and choices. The last time she'd seen Lorena was at that final Christmas party before everything fell apart. The older woman had pulled her aside, pressing a small wrapped box into her hands. For when you need to remember that you have value beyond what others assign to you, she'd said cryptically. Inside had been the pearl earrings Shonda still wore on special occasions, the only jewelry she'd kept from that time in her life. She touched them now through her uniform shirt, feeling their small weight against her earlobes. That night, after her son was asleep, Shonda sat on her couch with her laptop, reading every article about Lorena's death she could find. The funeral was in 2 days. Open to the public, though everyone knew public in the Vance world meant their version of public, people with the right clothes and the right names, and the right bank accounts. Her phone lay beside her, Marisol's number pulled up but not dialed. She knew what her friend would say, "Don't go. It's not worth the risk." Or maybe, "Go. You need closure." The problem was, Shonda didn't know which advice she wanted to hear. One voice in her head, the protective mother voice, said she had no right to attend. She'd walked away from that family, chosen to raise her son alone rather than subject him to their judgment. Showing up now would be hypocritical, selfish, potentially dangerous to the careful life she'd built. But another voice, quieter but insistent, reminded her that Lorena had been kind when she didn't have to be. That funeral wasn't about Roland or Alistair or old wounds. It was about saying goodbye to someone who'd made her feel seen during a time when she'd been invisible to everyone else who mattered. She thought about her son sleeping in the next room, how she'd taught him about respect and gratitude and honoring people who'd been good to you. How could she teach him these values if she couldn't practice them herself? The real question haunted her. Was staying away protecting her son, or was it protecting herself? After 5 years, the answer was getting harder to distinguish. She closed the laptop and picked up the obituary she'd saved, running her fingers over Lorena's photograph. The woman smiled back at her, that same warm expression she'd worn when she'd said, "You have an eye. Don't let life talk you out of using it." "I never became the architect you thought I could be," Shonda whispered to the photographer, "but I became a mother. I think you would have understood that choice." But would Lorena have understood keeping her grandson a secret? Would she have approved of Shonda's decision to raise him in Queens instead of letting him know his heritage? These questions had no answers now, just the hollow ache of wondering what might have been different if Lorena had known. By midnight, she'd made her decision. She would go to the funeral, and she would take her son. Not to create drama or reveal secrets, but to pay respects to a woman who'd shown her kindness when the rest of the world had shown her its back. She pulled her one black dress from the closet, the same one she'd worn to job interviews and school presentations, simple and appropriate and invisible. It still fit, mostly, though her body had changed since carrying her son, becoming softer in some places, stronger in others. Her son had a small suit from the thrift store bought for a cousin's wedding last year. The pants were slightly short now. He was growing so fast, but with the jacket buttoned, no one would notice. Or at least she hoped they wouldn't notice. The Vance crowd noticed everything. She made a plan, strategic and careful like all her plans these days. Arrive after the service started, when everyone would be seated and facing forward. Sit in the back, closest to the exit. Leave during the final hymn, before people started mingling. No receiving line, no reception, no chance meetings in the parking lot. She would say her goodbye to Lorena and leave before Alistair could get close enough to ask questions, close enough to hurt her all over again. It was a good plan. Solid, safe. But as she lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, she wondered what would happen if her son inherited more than just his father's eyes. What if he'd inherited that Vance stubbornness too? What if he asked questions she couldn't deflect? What if someone recognized him for what he was, not just a boy who looked like Alistair, but Alistair's son? The ceiling stared back at her in the dark, no answers written in its water stains and cracks. Tomorrow she'd have to be stronger than she'd been in years. Tomorrow she'd walk back into a world that had rejected her, holding the hand of the child they'd never wanted to exist. "Give me strength, Lorena," she whispered into the darkness. "Just one more time. Help me be brave enough to do the right thing." She touched the pearl earrings on her nightstand, the last gift from a woman who'd believed in her when no one else had. She'd wear them to the funeral, a small tribute to kindness in a world that often valued everything else more. Outside, sirens wailed and the city continued its restless night. Inside this small Queen's apartment, a single mother prepared to face the past she'd been running from for 5 years, armed with nothing but love for her son and respect for a woman who deserved to be remembered. The organ music filled St. Augustine's chapel with somber majesty, each note reverberating through the stone walls like grief-given sound. Shonda kept her arm around her son, who sat unnaturally still beside her, his 5-year-old energy temporarily subdued by the formal atmosphere and sea of black clothing. "Why is everyone so quiet?" he whispered, his voice carrying further than he intended in the hushed space. She leaned close to his ear, speaking softly. "When someone passes away, we gather to remember them and say goodbye. The quiet helps us think about all the good memories, like when we said goodbye to Mrs. Patterson's cat. Similar, yes. But this is for a person, so it's bigger." The minister began speaking about resurrection and eternal life, words that floated over the congregation like clouds, present but untouchable. Her son fidgeted with his clip-on tie until Shonda gently stilled his hands, giving him her phone to play with on silent mode, knowing this was the only way to keep him settled through what would be a long service. The chapel was exactly as she remembered from years ago when she and Alistair had met with the minister about their wedding plans. The same stained glass windows casting rainbow patterns across marble floors, the same wooden pews that creaked slightly when people shifted, the same altar where she'd imagined standing in white instead of hiding in black. From her position in the back, she could see the family in the front rows. Roland sat rigid as a statue, his grief invisible behind perfect posture. Alistair was beside him, shoulders slightly hunched in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable than the confident executive on billboards. Other relatives filled the surrounding pews, cousins and aunts and business partners who were practically family, all maintaining that careful balance between showing appropriate sorrow and preserving dignity. The eulogies began with Roland's business partner, a silver-haired man who spoke about Lorena's grace at charity galas, and her ability to remember everyone's names at company events. He told a story about her organizing a fundraiser that raised $3 million for the Metropolitan Museum, as if the dollar amount was the measure of her worth. Next came a woman from Lorena's book club, who talked about her love of Russian literature and her insightful comments during their monthly meetings. She mentioned Lorena's generous hosting and the way she always served tea in actual china, never paper cups, details that painted a picture of refined elegance but revealed nothing of the woman's heart. A cousin spoke about family holidays at the Vance estate, the perfectly decorated Christmas trees and elaborate dinner parties, where Lorena orchestrated every detail like a conductor leading a symphony. Each story was polished, appropriate, entirely focused on the public persona rather than the private person. The minister introduced each speaker with practiced formality, and Shonda found herself growing frustrated with these surface-level remembrances. Where were the stories about Lorena's kindness to people who couldn't benefit her? About her quiet doubts regarding the world she'd married into, about the woman who'd made tea for a crying girl in her kitchen and told her she had value beyond what others assigned. Her son tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, they're talking about fancy parties. Was the nice lady fancy?" "She could be fancy when she needed to be," Shonda whispered back. "But she was also kind." "That's more important than fancy." "Oh, I think being kind is better too." From the mouths of children, she thought, came the truths adults spent entire eulogies avoiding. When Alistair rose to speak, the atmosphere shifted. Even from the back, Shonda could feel the congregation's attention sharpen. Here was the grieving son, the heir, the one whose pain mattered most in this gathering of calculated sorrows. He approached the podium slowly, taking a moment to compose himself before speaking. When he finally looked up, his eyes swept across the crowd, pausing for just a moment when they reached the back rows, though she couldn't be sure if he'd seen her specifically or was just taking in the full room. "My mother," he began, then stopped, clearing his throat. "My mother lived in two worlds. There was the Lorena Vance you all knew, the hostess, the philanthropist, the woman who could make small talk with anyone and make them feel like the most important person in the room. But there was another version of her, one that few people got to see." He paused, his fingers gripping the podium edges. Late at night, after the parties ended and the guests went home, she'd sit in the kitchen, never the formal living room, always the kitchen, and she'd talk to me about real things, about art that moved her, not because it was expensive, but because it spoke to something inside her, about people she'd met who were doing interesting things with their lives, regardless of their bank accounts. Shonda's son looked up from the phone, drawn by something in Alistair's voice. Her heart raced, but he just watched with innocent curiosity before returning to his game. "She taught me that money was a tool, not a measure of worth. I'm ashamed to say I understood that lesson too late. I spent years chasing deals and developments, thinking success meant higher buildings and bigger profits. She tried to tell me that success meant something else: connection, authenticity, choosing love over logic. His voice cracked slightly on the word love, and he took a moment to steady himself. She believed in people's potential, especially people others overlooked. She'd champion artists who were still learning their craft, support businesses that were just starting out, defend choices that didn't make sense on spreadsheets but made perfect sense in the heart. Shonda felt tears burning her eyes, remembering Lorena looking at her sketches, seeing promise where others saw presumption. "I failed her in many ways," Alistair continued, his voice stronger now but weighted with regret. "I chose safety over courage, expectations over authenticity, the path laid out for me over the one I should have carved myself. She forgave me, of course. She always forgave. But I'm not sure I'll ever forgive myself for the years I wasted not being the son she raised me to be." He looked directly at the casket, surrounded by its fortress of white roses. "Mom, I promise to do better, to be better, to remember that buildings are just concrete and glass unless they shelter something meaningful, to value people for who they are, not what they can offer, to choose love, even when, especially when, it doesn't make sense on paper." The words landed on Shonda like weights, each one a reminder of what might have been if he'd had this courage 5 years ago. As Alistair returned to his seat, Shonda found herself fighting a war inside her chest. Part of her wanted to believe his words, to think he'd genuinely changed, genuinely understood what he'd lost, by choosing his father's path over their love. But another part, the part that had heard him promise to handle her, wondered if he'd just learned to say the right things at the right times. Rich people were good at that, performing emotion when it served them, showing depth during eulogies and shallowness in boardrooms. How many times had she watched him switch between the Alistair she loved and the Vance heir his father demanded, like changing masks between scenes? Still, the pain in his voice had sounded real. The regret had weight to it, substance that couldn't be faked. Or maybe she just wanted to believe it was real because it would mean their love had mattered, had changed him even if it hadn't been enough to choose her. Her son shifted beside her, and she was reminded why she'd come, not for Alistair or their complicated past, but for Lorena, who deserved more than she'd gotten from life, including the chance to know her grandson. That thought hit her with unexpected force. Lorena had died never knowing she had a grandson, never getting to see those amber-brown eyes in a child's face, never hearing about his love of dinosaurs and his emerging kindness, never being the grandmother she would have been. Warm and encouraging and seeing potential where others saw limitations. Shonda had taken that from her. In protecting her son from the Vance family, she'd also deprived Lorena of something precious. The guilt of that realization settled in her chest like a stone. The service continued with more prayers and hymns. Shonda's mind drifted to another kitchen conversation with Lorena, this one from the summer before everything ended. They'd been looking at Shonda's portfolio together while Alistair and Roland argued about something in the study, always arguing. Those two, like business, was a battle that never ended. "You know," Lorena had said, tracing her finger over a design for a community centre Shonda had created for her senior project, "Roland would hate this. Because it's not profitable, because it's generous. My husband sees generosity as weakness, did you know that? He thinks giving anything away without getting something back is foolish." She'd smiled sadly. "I used to argue with him about it, but I learned to pick my battles. Or maybe I just learned to lose quietly. You don't seem like someone who loses." "Oh, my dear, I've been losing for 30 years. I just do it with excellent posture and appropriate jewelry." She touched her pearl necklace, the one she never took off. "But you still have a fight in you. Don't let anyone, not Roland, not even Alistair, convince you to stop fighting for what you believe in." Alistair wouldn't. Alistair is my son, and I love him more than life itself. But he's also his father's son, trained from birth to see the world through spreadsheets and profit margins. He's fighting against that training. I can see it when he looks at you. But fights like that, sometimes love isn't enough to win them. The memory stung now, sitting in Lorena's funeral, knowing how right she'd been. Love hadn't been enough. Not for Alistair to choose her, not for her to stay and fight, not for any of them to get the life they'd wanted. If she could go back to that kitchen conversation, what would she tell Lorena? Would she admit she was pregnant? Would she ask for help navigating the impossible situation with Roland and Alistair? Would Lorena have protected them, or would family loyalty have won out in the end? She'd never know now. Another loss to add to the collection. The service concluded with a final hymn, Amazing Grace, which half the congregation sang and half just mouthed along to, too wealthy or too worn down to put feeling into the words. As the last notes faded, the minister invited everyone to pay their final respects before the casket would be closed for burial. A line formed, people moving slowly past the open casket, some touching the edge briefly, others simply nodding before moving on. Shonda knew she should leave now, while everyone was distracted, while she could still slip out unnoticed. But her son had put the phone down and was watching the procession with serious eyes. "Mama, are they saying goodbye?" "Yes, baby, to the lady who was nice to you, the one whose house you visited." She'd mentioned Lorena once or twice over the years, careful stories about a kind woman who'd encouraged her dreams. She hadn't expected him to remember, but 5-year-olds had surprising memories for details that mattered. "That's right, sweetheart. Can I say goodbye too? You said it's important to thank people who are nice to us." Her own lessons come back to complicate her escape plan. She looked at the line, calculated the risk, weighed her son's moral education against her need for safety. The mother won over the fugitive. "Yes, we can say goodbye. But quickly, okay?" They joined the end of the line, Shonda keeping her son slightly in front of her, using her body to shield him from direct view of the front pews. As they moved forward, she heard fragments of other people's goodbyes. "Rest well, Lorena. The city won't be the same without you. Your charity work will continue, I promise." When they reached the casket, her son stood on his tiptoes to see better. Lorena looked peaceful, wearing a navy dress instead of black, her pearl necklace still in place. The funeral home had done their work well. She looked like she might wake up any moment and ask if anyone wanted tea. Her son studied her for a long moment, then looked up at the portrait placed beside the casket. "She has a nice smile," he said quietly, like she knew secrets but good ones. "She did," Shonda whispered, her throat tight. He turned back to the casket and spoke in his clear young voice. "Thank you for being nice to my mama when she was sad. I hope you're not sick anymore wherever you are. Maybe you can watch her sometimes, like guardian angels do. Mama says you believed in her when other people didn't, so I think you must have been very smart." Several people nearby turned to look, touched by the child's sincere words. Shonda saw recognition dawn on some faces, former acquaintances starting to place her, starting to notice her son's familiar features. "We should go now," she murmured, taking his hand. They'd almost reached the side door when she heard her name spoken quietly but with an authority that made it impossible to pretend she hadn't heard. "Shonda." She turned slowly, keeping her son slightly behind her. Alistair stood 10 feet away, close enough that she could see the exhaustion written in every line of his face, far enough that it felt like the chasm of 5 years stretched between them. "Alistair." She kept her voice neutral, polite, the tone you'd use with a stranger who happened to know your name. "I'm sorry for your loss. Your mother was a remarkable woman. Thank you for coming. I didn't expect to see you here. She was kind to me once. That deserved acknowledgement. He took a step closer, and she saw his eyes flicker to her son, who'd moved beside her, curious about this stranger who knew his mother's name. She watched Alistair's face change as he truly looked at the child for the first time up close. The recognition, the mathematics of years and features, the dawning understanding that shifted his expression from grief to something more complex. The resemblance was undeniable at this distance. Same eyes, same nose, same chin that would one day be strong and stubborn like his father's. Her son looked back at Alistair with equal curiosity, perhaps sensing something familiar without understanding what. "Could we talk?" Alistair's voice was carefully controlled, but she heard the tremor underneath. "Please, just for a few minutes." "Mama, I'm hungry," her son said, tugging at her hand, unaware of the tension crackling between the adults. "I know, baby. We'll get something soon." She looked back at Alistair, seeing Roland approaching from across the room, his radar for threats to the family reputation apparently still functional, even in grief. "There's a side entrance by the prayer garden. I'll meet you there in 5 minutes, after I get him settled. Shonda?" "5 minutes, Alistair." "That's all." She walked away before he could respond, leading her son toward the small anteroom where she'd noticed coffee and cookies earlier, funeral refreshments that would keep a 5-year-old occupied while she faced whatever came next. Her hands shook as she poured juice into a paper cup, settling him in a chair where she could see him through the doorway, but where he couldn't hear adult conversations that might change his world. "Stay right here, sweetheart. Eat your cookie, and I'll be back in just a few minutes. Is that man your friend?" "He's someone I used to know. Be good, okay?" He nodded, already focused on choosing between chocolate chip and sugar cookies, unaware that his mother was about to face his father for the first time since she'd shut a door in his face 5 years ago. She checked her reflection in the window, still composed, still controlled, giving nothing away. The pearl earrings caught the light, Lorena's last gift, reminding her that she had value beyond what others assigned. She touched them briefly, gathering strength from a woman who couldn't help anymore, but whose belief still mattered. Then she walked toward the prayer garden entrance, toward the conversation that would either destroy the careful life she'd built, or force her to finally face the truth she'd been running from, that her son deserved to know his father, and she deserved to stop carrying this secret alone. The hallway stretched before her like a gauntlet. At the end of it, Alistair waited, and with him came 5 years of questions, accusations, and the devastating possibility that everything she'd done to protect her son had been the wrong choice all along. The prayer garden entrance opened onto a small stone hallway, quiet and cool compared to the crowded chapel. Afternoon light filtered through narrow windows, casting long shadows across the floor where Shonda stood waiting, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. She heard his footsteps before she saw him, expensive shoes on marble, the sound of wealth approaching. Alistair appeared at the end of the hallway, loosening his tie slightly as if it had been strangling him through the service. He stopped a few feet away, maintaining distance, both of them aware they were standing in a minefield of unspoken truths. "That boy," he said, the words coming out harder than perhaps he'd intended. "He's mine, isn't he? He's not yours. He's his own person, a child, Alistair. Not a possession, not a scandal, not a problem to be handled. That's not what I meant." "Then say what you mean. After 5 years, I think we're past dancing around things." His jaw tightened, that familiar gesture when he was fighting to control his temper. "Fine. Is he my biological child, yes or no?" "Yes." The single word hung between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. She watched him process it, saw the confirmation of what he'd already suspected hit him with the force of certainty. His hands formed fists at his sides, then released, then formed again, a physical manifestation of emotions he couldn't quite control. 5 years. His voice was low, shaking with controlled fury. You've kept my son from me for 5 years. Don't you dare." She stepped forward, her own anger rising to match his. "Don't you dare make this about what I kept from you when you made it impossible for me to stay." "I made it impossible. You're the one who disappeared. Changed your number, moved to another city without telling anyone where you went, blocked me from every possible way to reach you. I tried, Shonda. For months I tried to find you. Did you try before or after you told your father you'd handle me?" The question stopped him cold. His expression shifted from anger to confusion. "What are you talking about?" "That night. The night I came to tell you I was pregnant. You were talking to Roland, and I heard every word. You were there. I was outside your door. I heard him demand you end the distraction, heard him say no surprise pregnancies, no scandals. And I heard you," her voice cracked, despite her determination to stay strong. "I heard you say you understood, that you'd handle everything." Recognition flickered across his face, memory clearly reconstructing that conversation from 5 years ago. "You heard that conversation and thought—" "I thought exactly what any woman would think hearing the man she loves agree to eliminate any inconvenient children. I was pregnant, Alistair. Standing in your hallway with a positive pregnancy test in my purse, rehearsing how to tell you we were going to be parents, and I heard your father reduce our baby to a problem, and you promised to solve it." "I didn't know you were pregnant." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Would it have mattered? You'd already agreed to end us. That's not. I wasn't agreeing to end us. I was buying time, telling him what he needed to hear so I could figure out how to protect you, protect us, by promising to handle me like a business liability." He ran his hands through his hair, the perfect styling from this morning completely destroyed. "I was weak. I was scared. I thought if I could just get him to back off, I could find a way to keep both, my position in the company and you. I was wrong, clearly, but I never meant. When I came to your apartment the next day to tell you everything, to give you a chance to explain, you asked if I was pregnant. You hesitated when I asked if you'd tell your father. That hesitation told me everything I needed to know. I hesitated because I was processing. You ambushed me with a hypothetical question about a situation I'd never considered, and I was trying to think through the implications. The implications of your child existing? The fact that you needed to think about it at all proved I made the right choice leaving. The words hung between them, sharp and cutting. Shonda felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. She'd cried enough over Alistair Vance 5 years ago. She wouldn't give him more tears now. I was pregnant, she said clearly, her voice steady despite the emotion churning inside. I was carrying your child, and I heard you promise your father you'd handle it. What was I supposed to think? That you'd suddenly grow a spine and choose us over his approval? You were supposed to talk to me. You were supposed to give me the chance to step up instead of making the decision for both of us. I gave you a chance. I asked you directly what you'd do, and you hesitated. That hesitation was your answer. She took a shaky breath, forcing herself to articulate what she'd carried for 5 years. Do you know what it's like to be pregnant and terrified? To know you're carrying a life that half the world will see as a mistake? I couldn't raise my baby around people who thought he was a problem. That needed solving. I couldn't watch your family treat him like I'd been treated, tolerated at best, eliminated at worst. My mother wouldn't have. Your mother was one person in a family full of Rolands. One kind voice doesn't drown out a chorus of judgment. And your hesitation that day told me you weren't strong enough to stand between our child and that chorus. So I made myself strong enough for both of us. By running away, by choosing my child over everything else, over you, over the life I'd imagined, over the desperate hope that love would somehow be enough. I chose him, and I'd make that same choice 1,000 times over. Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice stayed steady. You want to know where I've been? Working double shifts to afford a safe neighborhood, taking buses to save money so I could buy him decent clothes, wearing the same black dress to every event because I can't afford more than one, explaining to my son why he doesn't have a father without telling him his father's family would rather he didn't exist. That's where I've been, Alistair. Where have you been? Looking for you. His voice broke on the words. For the first 6 months, I hired investigators. I called every mutual friend we had. I went to your mother's new workplace until she threatened to call security if I didn't leave her alone. I checked every architecture firm in 3 states. You vanished like you'd never existed. Good. That was the point. The point was to torture me, to punish me for one conversation you overheard and misunderstood. I didn't misunderstand anything. Your father laid out exactly what he expected, and you agreed. That's not misunderstanding. That's hearing the truth you didn't want me to know. He leaned against the wall, the fight seeming to drain out of him. You're right. You're right that I was weak, that I let my father's expectations matter more than they should have, that I didn't fight hard enough for us when it counted. He looked up at her, his eyes, their son's eyes, filled with pain and regret. But you're wrong that I would have chosen them over our child. How can you possibly know that? You never got the chance to choose, because I've spent 5 years regretting every choice I made that drove you away. Because I sabotaged every relationship my father arranged, I couldn't commit to any woman who wasn't you. Because I turned down the vice president position twice before finally accepting it, trying to prove I could succeed on my own terms, not his. That's supposed to impress me? You turned down promotions while I was changing diapers alone. No, God, no. Nothing I did comes close to what you've carried, I know that. But you asked where I've been, and the answer is stuck. Stuck in the moment you walked away, stuck wondering what I could have done differently, stuck being the coward you accused me of being because you were absolutely right. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 5 years of missed moments and misunderstood intentions. In that quiet, the truth settled around them like dust after an explosion. Messy, complicated, refusing to land neatly on one side or the other. They'd both been acting from hurt. Both made choices rooted in fear rather than faith. Shonda had heard a conversation and assumed the worst because she'd been conditioned to expect rejection from his world. Alistair had given his father empty promises because he'd been conditioned to manage situations rather than confront them directly. Neither was fully innocent. Both had let pride speak louder than vulnerability, had chosen assumptions over communication, had built walls instead of bridges. The 5 years between them weren't just his fault or hers, they belonged to both of them equally. A shared failure born of pain and poor timing, and the fundamental inability to trust that love could survive the weight of their different worlds. We can't undo 5 years, Shonda finally said, her voice exhausted. We can't get back the time you lost, or the struggles I faced alone. The past is done, and arguing about who was more wrong doesn't change anything. So what do we do now? I don't know. I came here to say goodbye to your mother, not to blow up my son's entire existence. Our son. She flinched at the possessive pronoun. Biologically, yes. But he doesn't know you. You're a stranger who happens to share his DNA. Then let me stop being a stranger. What's his name? Alistair asked, his voice gentler now. I heard him call you Mama, but I don't know his name. She hesitated, knowing this detail would hurt him. Knowing it would make everything more real, more immediate. His name is Isaac. Isaac. He tested the name, tasting it like something precious. That's a strong name. I named him after my grandfather. He died before I was born, but my mother said he was the kindest man she ever knew. I wanted our son to have that legacy, kindness over wealth, character over status. It's perfect. It suits him. His voice caught. Does he ask about me? He asks about his father, not about you specifically, because he doesn't know you exist. I tell him his dad lives far away, that things were complicated, that none of it is his fault. What else can I say? The truth is too complex for a 5-year-old. What is the truth? How do you explain this to him? She looked at him directly, all her protective walls temporarily lowered by exhaustion and grief. I don't explain to you. I will explain his middle name. His middle name? Isaac Vance. I gave him your last name as his middle name because even though I was raising him alone, I couldn't erase half of who he is. Every time someone asks about it, I tell him it's after a teacher who believed in me. He doesn't know it's yours, not yet. Alistair closed his eyes, processing this. You gave him my name. I gave him his name. His birthright, even if I wasn't ready for him to claim it. He deserves to know where he comes from, even if I couldn't handle him being part of that world yet. Yet. You said it already. Don't read too much into one word, but they both knew it was significant. Yet it meant possibility. Yet I mean maybe someday. Yet meant the door wasn't completely closed, just carefully guarded. Alistair pushed off from the wall, taking a step closer, but still maintaining respectful distance. Let me meet him. Really meet him. Not just see him across a chapel. Let me prove I'm not the monster you've built me up to be in your head. Every protective instinct Shonda had screamed at her to refuse, to grab Isaac and run like she'd done 5 years ago, to protect her child from the complications this man represented. But another voice, quieter but insistent, reminded her that she'd promised Isaac honesty and promised he'd never wonder if he was wanted. And watching Alistair now, seeing genuine pain and regret in his face, she wondered if she'd been protecting Isaac, or just protecting herself from facing this exact moment. 5 minutes, she heard herself say. In the anteroom where I left him, where I can see you both the entire time you don't tell him who you are. That's my decision to make, my timeline to choose. You just talk to him. See who he is. Thank you. The relief in his voice was palpable. Don't thank me yet. This isn't forgiveness, Alistair. This isn't us getting back together or you suddenly getting custody or any fantasy you might be building in your head. This is one conversation with a 5-year-old boy who has no idea his entire life might be about to change. I understand. Do you? Because if you do anything to hurt him, if you make him feel less than or unwanted, or like his existence is inconvenient, I will make those 5 years of not finding me look easy. I will disappear so completely you'll think I was never real. I won't hurt him. I swear on my mother's memory, I won't hurt our son. She studied his face, looking for the lie, the manipulation, the corporate executive who knew exactly what to say to close a deal. But all she saw was a man who'd just buried his mother and discovered he was a father in the same afternoon, drowning in grief and shock and desperate hope. 5 minutes. That's all I'm promising. That's all I'm asking. Think about this moment. If you were Shonda, would you let Alistair meet Isaac? Would you risk your child's emotional safety for the chance at having a father in his life? Or would you protect the peace you've built, even if it means Isaac never knows where he comes from? Comment let him meet if you think Isaac deserves to know his father, or protect Isaac if you think Shonda should have refused. Your perspective matters because these impossible choices between protection and truth, between safety and completeness, are the choices real parents face every day. If this story is gripping you, if you're feeling the weight of these decisions, hit that like button and share this with someone who understands how complicated family can be. Subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories, because this is only the beginning of Isaac's journey to discover his father and Shonda's journey to decide if the man who broke her heart deserves a chance to know their son. Shonda led Alistair back through the chapel's quiet corridors toward the anteroom, her heart beating so hard she was certain he could hear it. With each step she questioned her decision. Was she doing the right thing for Isaac, or opening a door she'd never be able to close again? Isaac sat exactly where she'd left him, swinging his legs from the chair, cookie crumbs on his shirt, completely unaware that his entire world was about to shift. He looked up when they entered, his eyes moving from his mother to the stranger beside her with innocent curiosity. "Isaac, sweetheart, there's someone I need you to meet." Her voice was steadier than she felt. The boy hopped down from his chair, moving closer to Shonda instinctively, the way children do when faced with unknowns. Alistair knelt down to Isaac's eye level, making himself smaller, less intimidating. The movement put them face to face, and the resemblance was undeniable, those same eyes staring at each other across 5 years of absence. Isaac's mouth opened slightly, his gaze moving between Alistair's face and his mother's. "He has my eyes," he said, that simple observation carrying more weight than he could possibly understand. "You have his eyes," Shonda corrected gently, her hand on Isaac's shoulder both supportive and protective. "Isaac, this is Alistair Vance. He's your father." The words hung in the air like something fragile and precious. Isaac's eyes went wide, processing this information with the seriousness only a 5-year-old could bring to world-changing news. "My real dad? The one who lives far away?" "Yes, baby, your real dad." Isaac took a small step closer, studying Alistair with the intense focus children apply when trying to understand something important. "You're really my dad? I really am." Alistair's voice was thick with emotion he was clearly fighting to control. "And I'm so sorry I haven't been here. I didn't know about you, Isaac. If I had known, I would have been here from the very beginning." "Why didn't you know? Don't dads always know about their kids?" The question was so innocent, so logical in a child's worldview, that it cut deeper than any accusation. Alistair glanced at Shonda, looking for permission or guidance, and she gave him a small nod. He'd asked for this chance, now he had to navigate it. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes and don't talk to each other when they should. "Your mom and I, we had a disagreement, and I didn't know she was going to have you. But now that I do know, I want to be part of your life, if that's okay with you." Isaac considered this with the gravity of a judge. "You look like me, or I look like you. Mrs. Patterson says I have special eyes. You do have special eyes. My mom, your grandmother, had eyes like ours too." "I have a grandmother?" The excitement in Isaac's voice was immediate and pure. Alistair's face fell. "You did. She passed away. That's why we're all here today, to say goodbye to her. But she would have loved you so much, Isaac. I wish she could have met you." "Yes, sweetheart. That was Lorena, and she was a very special person." Isaac processed this, then returned his attention to Alistair. "Do we look alike in other ways too?" "Let's see." Alistair held up his hand, and Isaac matched it palm to palm, his tiny hand dwarfed by his father's, but the shape similar, the long fingers identical. "Same hands. Same nose too," Isaac said, touching his own nose, then pointing at Alistair's. "And the same chin. Tommy at school says I have a superhero chin." "Tommy's right. That's a Vance chin, strong and stubborn. Are you stubborn? Very. Are you?" "Mama says I am when I don't want to eat vegetables." Alistair laughed, genuine and warm, and Isaac smiled back, pleased to have made his father laugh. Shonda watched this exchange with her arms crossed, protecting herself against the surge of complicated emotions, relief that it was going well, fear of what came next, and an unexpected grief for all the moments like this they'd missed. "Alistair, we need to be clear about something," she interrupted, her voice firm. "This can't become a situation where you show up with expensive gifts trying to buy his affection or make promises you can't keep because your schedule gets busy. Isaac deserves consistency, not a part-time father who drops in when convenient." "I understand. Do you? Because being a parent isn't about fun visits to toy stores and playing the hero. It's about showing up for dentist appointments and school plays and the boring, hard parts that don't make you feel like Father of the Year. Isaac looked between them, sensing tension without fully understanding it. Alistair kept his voice calm, speaking to Shonda but including Isaac in his gaze. I don't want to be a visitor in his life. I want to be his father, real, present, consistent. Whatever rules you set, whatever boundaries you need, I'll respect them. But please give me the chance to prove I can do this. Mama, can he come to my birthday party? It's in 3 weeks and we're having pizza. The question, so pure and hopeful, cut through the adult tension. Shonda looked at her son's eager face, then at Alistair's careful hope, and felt the wall she'd built starting to develop cracks. You like pizza? Alistair asked Isaac, following Shonda's lead to keep things light. It's my favorite, pepperoni with extra cheese. And I like superheroes too. Do you like superheroes? I do. Which one's your favorite? Spider-Man. He's the best because he's just a regular kid who got powers and uses them to help people. Who's yours? Alistair thought about this seriously. I think I like Iron Man. He made mistakes but tried to fix them and protect people. Iron Man's cool too. We could watch movies together. Mama, can we? Shonda saw Alistair defer to her immediately, waiting for her permission before answering. That small gesture, acknowledging her authority as the parent who'd been there all along, meant more than grand declarations. Maybe. If your dad, if Alistair, proves he can keep showing up, we can talk about movie nights. I'll show up, Alistair said, speaking to both of them. For the birthday party, for movies, for whatever Isaac needs, whatever you both need, can you come to my school? We have a thing where parents come and talk about their jobs. You could tell everyone about buildings. Mama says you make really tall ones. I'd love to come to your school, but that's something I need to discuss with your mom first. Is that okay? Isaac nodded, accepting this answer with the adaptability of childhood. Okay, but you'll come to my party, right? Promise? I promise. 3 weeks, pizza and superheroes. I'll be there. Shonda watched this exchange carefully, looking for false notes, for the corporate smooth talking that could charm anyone. But what she saw instead was a man genuinely trying to connect with his son, making promises small enough to keep while acknowledging boundaries he didn't have the right to cross yet. True to his word, Alistair showed up to Isaac's birthday party at the small pizza place near Shonda's apartment. He arrived early, helped set up decorations, and stayed late to help clean up, not because it was glamorous, but because it was what parents did. He wore jeans and a regular shirt, no designer labels visible, fitting in with the other parents rather than standing out. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Saturday mornings became their time. Alistair would pick up Isaac for a few hours while Shonda ran errands or caught up on sleep she desperately needed. They'd go to the park near her apartment, pushing Isaac on swings and playing in the jungle gym. Sometimes they'd get ice cream at the shop on the corner, where Isaac always ordered chocolate and Alistair learned to keep extra napkins handy. These weren't elaborate outings to expensive attractions, just normal father-son time in public places where Shonda could verify they'd been, where other parents and children provided natural boundaries. Alistair seemed to understand that trust was built in small increments, not grand gestures. He learned that Isaac hated mushrooms but loved broccoli, that he was afraid of dogs bigger than him but wanted a pet hamster, that his favorite color changed weekly but dinosaurs were a constant passion. He attended a soccer game where Isaac spent more time picking dandelions than watching the ball, and he cheered anyway. He helped with homework, struggling through first-grade math that was somehow more complicated than corporate finance. Why is there new math? He'd complained to Shonda once, frustrated by Isaac's subtraction worksheet. Math is math. Numbers don't change. Welcome to modern parenting, she replied, almost smiling. The almost smile felt like progress. Like maybe, eventually, they could navigate this new relationship without the constant weight of their past pressing down on every interaction. The first real test came 6 weeks in, when Alistair's phone rang during their Saturday park visit. Shonda watched from a bench as he looked at the screen, clearly a work call, then declined it and put the phone in his pocket, returning his full attention to Isaac on the slide. But the following week, an emergency board meeting ran long, and he was 20 minutes late for pickup. Shonda's anxiety had spiked immediately. Here it comes, the pattern of broken promises she'd been expecting. But Alistair arrived apologetic and sincere, kneeling down to Isaac's level before even greeting Shonda. "I'm sorry I was late, buddy. That wasn't okay. I promised to be here at 10, and I broke that promise. It won't happen again." "It's okay. Mama said you might be working." "It's not okay, though. When I make you a promise, I need to keep it. So from now on, Saturday mornings are just for us. No work calls, no meetings. Deal? Deal." He'd stood then, facing Shonda. "I'm sorry. Truly. I rescheduled the standing Saturday meeting permanently. This time is sacred." And he'd kept that commitment. Through project deadlines and client emergencies, Saturday mornings remained untouchable. It was a small thing, maybe, but Shonda noticed. Actions, not words. Consistency, not excuses. She found herself relaxing incrementally, the constant vigilance easing slightly as weeks turned into months, and Alistair continued showing up. Not perfectly. He still sometimes struggled with boundaries, still occasionally had to be reminded that parenting decisions required her input. But he was trying. Genuinely, visibly trying. The confrontation with Roland was inevitable. It came 2 months into their new arrangement, when one of Roland's society friends mentioned seeing Alistair at a children's pizza parlor. Within hours, Roland had shown up at Alistair's office, demanding explanations. Alistair told Shonda about it later, during one of their careful conversations on her building's front steps, while Isaac played in the small courtyard. "He threatened to cut me off financially, remove me from the company leadership track, tie up custody in courts for years." Alistair's voice was calm, but she could hear the underlying steel. "He said Isaac was a complication that could be managed if I'd just be reasonable." "What did you say?" Her heart was racing, preparing for disappointment, for the moment when family pressure would prove stronger than fatherly love. "I told him Isaac is my son, not a complication. That you are the mother of my child and deserve respect, not management. That if he tried to use lawyers or money to control this situation, I'd resign from the company entirely and build something of my own. You'd really walk away from Vance Enterprises." "I'd walk away from anything that required me to choose between corporate approval and my son. I made that mistake once with you. I won't make it again with Isaac." He must have been furious. He was. Still is. "But I'm not 23 anymore, Shonda. I'm not afraid of disappointing him if it means protecting my family." The word family hung between them. Isaac certainly, but did it include her too? She wasn't ready to ask, and wasn't ready for whatever answer he might give. But the fact that he'd stood up to Roland, had chosen Isaac over his father's approval, meant something. It was the choice she'd needed him to make 5 years ago, finally happening now when it could matter for their son. A week after the confrontation with Roland, Alistair asked if they could talk privately. Mrs. Patterson agreed to watch Isaac for an hour, and they walked to a coffee shop 3 blocks away, neutral territory where difficult conversations could happen without little ears listening. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, worn at the edges like it had been read many times. "My mother left letters for people. The lawyer gave me mine last week. I think you should read part of it." Shonda took the letter carefully, noting Lorena's elegant handwriting on expensive stationery. Her eyes scanned the paragraphs until Alistair pointed to a specific section. "That girl from the library with the sketches and the fire in her eyes. Don't let her go, Alistair. I know your father will pressure you, will make you choose between love and legacy. But legacies are just stone and paper. Love is what survives us. If you're reading this and you've already lost her, find her again. Apologize. Fight for her. Be the man I raised you to be, not the one your father demands. Tears blurred the words. Shonda set the letter down, unable to continue reading. She knew we were struggling, and she tried to help. She believed in you, in us. I found another part where she talks about keeping something aside for when Alistair finally gets his head out of the boardroom and remembers what matters. She left a trust fund specifically designated for any children I might have outside of approved arrangements. She planned for Isaac before he existed. She planned for the possibility that I might mess up and need help making it right. That's who she was, always 3 steps ahead, always believing people were worth more than their worst moments. Shonda pressed her hands to her face, overwhelmed by grief for a woman who'd seen more and believed more than they'd given her credit for. I wish she could have met him. Me too. But in a way, she's the reason he has a chance to know me now. Her letter made me realize I was repeating the same patterns, choosing comfort over courage. I'm trying to do better. You are doing better. The words came out before she could stop them, an admission she hadn't planned to make. Not perfect, but better. Isaac sees it. I see it. The acknowledgement hung between them, fragile and significant. Progress measured in small admissions and careful trust. As the weeks turned into months, Shonda and Alistair's interactions evolved from careful co-parenting discussions to something that almost resembled friendship. They'd talk while Isaac played, sharing stories from their separate lives, building a new foundation from the ruins of their old relationship. One evening, after a particularly good day at the zoo where Isaac had talked non-stop about penguins, Alistair walked them home and lingered on her building's steps. I never stopped loving you, he said quietly, watching Isaac chase pigeons in the courtyard. Even when I was angry about you leaving, even when I tried to convince myself I'd moved on, it was always you. You were the standard I measured everyone else against, and they all fell short. Love isn't enough, Alistair. We proved that 5 years ago. You're right. But love plus action, love plus change, love plus consistent effort, maybe that combination is enough. I'm not asking you to forgive me or take me back or anything like that. I just need you to know that every choice I make now, I make as someone who learned the hard way that feelings without follow-through are worthless. Actions are what matter, she agreed. Not what you feel, but what you do with those feelings. Then judge me by my actions. I'm showing up for Isaac every time I promise to. I'm standing up to my father instead of placating him. I'm learning to be the kind of man who deserves a second chance, even if that chance never comes. She didn't respond, but something in her chest loosened slightly. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility that maybe, with enough time and proof, forgiveness could exist. Here's the question that defines not just this story, but so many real relationships. Can people truly change? Can someone who let you down, who chose wrong when it mattered most, transform themselves into someone worthy of trust? Alistair is showing up, setting boundaries with his father, building a relationship with Isaac through consistency rather than grand gestures. But does that erase the 5 years Shonda struggled alone? Does present action redeem past failure? Type change if you believe people can earn back trust through sustained effort and transform behavior. Type nope if you think some breaks can't be repaired, no matter how much someone tries. Your perspective shapes these stories, helps us explore these complicated questions together. So share your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button if this journey is resonating with you, and subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories, because understanding how broken relationships might be rebuilt or shouldn't be matters to all of us navigating love, family, and forgiveness. 3 months after that funeral that changed everything, they spent a Saturday at Coney Island. It was Isaac's idea. He'd been learning about New York landmarks in school and wanted to see the beach and the famous rides. Alistair had agreed immediately, and Shonda had packed sunscreen and snacks, the three of them taking the subway out together like a real family. Isaac rode his first roller coaster with Alistair, screaming with joy while Shonda watched from below, her heart in her throat from both the ride's danger and the sight of them together, her past and her present colliding in the shape of her son's happiness. They ate hot dogs and won a stuffed bear from a carnival game that Alistair attacked with surprising competitiveness. They walked along the beach as the sun set, Isaac between them, holding both their hands. On the subway ride home, Isaac fell asleep against Alistair's shoulder, exhausted from sun and excitement. Alistair carried him carefully, adjusting his grip when the train lurched, protective and natural, in a way that made Shonda's chest ache with possibility and fear in equal measure. At her building's entrance, she expected the usual routine. Alistair would hand over a sleeping Isaac, they'd exchange pleasantries about next week's schedule, and he'd leave. But something felt different tonight, the air charged with unspoken potential. "Thank you for today," she said quietly, reaching for Isaac. "Let me carry him up," Alistair offered. "He's heavy when he's dead asleep like this." She should have said no, should have maintained the boundaries that had kept her heart safe these past months. But her arms were tired, her defenses were low, and the image of them as a family was too appealing to resist. Okay, but just to put him to bed. They rode the elevator in silence, Isaac's soft breathing the only sound. In her apartment, small and modest, showing every sign of careful budgeting, Alistair moved toward Isaac's room as if he'd done it 100 times. He laid their son in his bed gently, helping Shonda remove his shoes and pull up his blanket. At the bedroom door, they paused, both looking back at Isaac sleeping peacefully, surrounded by his drawings and dinosaur toys, and the life Shonda had built for him from scratch. "You've done an incredible job with him," Alistair whispered. "He's smart, kind and confident. That's all it's both of us. He got your stubbornness and determination, and your creativity and huge heart." They stood in her narrow hallway, close enough that she could smell his cologne, different from what he used to wear, more subtle, as if even his scent had matured. The apartment felt too small suddenly, filled with all the words they hadn't said and all the history they carried. "I should go," he said, but didn't move. "You should," she agreed, but didn't step away. "Unless, could I stay for coffee?" "Just coffee, nothing else." "I'd like to hear more about the design project you mentioned earlier." It was a small thing, an invitation for coffee, but they both knew it meant more. It meant letting him further into the life she'd built without him. It meant admitting that maybe, possibly, the walls around her heart had developed more than just cracks. "Just coffee," she said, leading him to her small kitchen. "And only because you promised to look at my portfolio for that community center bid." "Just coffee," he repeated, smiling. "And professional consulting, nothing more." But as she poured 2 cups, and they settled at her small table, talking about architecture and dreams and second chances, both of them knew they were lying. This was something more, something fragile and new, built on the foundation of their broken past, but growing toward a future neither had dared to hope for. Outside, the city continued its eternal rhythm. Inside this small queen's apartment, a family was being rebuilt, one careful moment at a time. The apartment told the story of 5 years in ways words never could. Alistair's eyes took in the details as he settled at her small kitchen table, the second-hand furniture lovingly maintained, the architectural sketches pinned to a corkboard above her makeshift workspace, the collection of Isaac's artwork that covered every available surface like a gallery of unconditional love. Everything was clean but clearly budgeted, chosen for function over form, each item representing careful decisions about how to spend limited resources. Yet there was warmth here that his penthouse had never achieved, despite its designer furniture and million-dollar views. This place had soul. "I can't offer you anything fancy," Shonda said, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. "No imported beans or espresso machines. Just regular coffee. Regular coffee sounds perfect." She set the mugs on the table, one with a chip on the rim, both functional despite their flaws, much like the relationship they were cautiously rebuilding. The silence between them felt different now, less weighted with accusation and more filled with possibility. "Your portfolio," Alistair said, nodding toward the drafting table by the window. "You said you were bidding on a community center project." She hesitated, unused to sharing her professional dreams with anyone, especially him. But something about tonight, the successful day with Isaac, the comfortable quiet of her apartment, the way Alistair looked at her like she still mattered, loosened her usual guardedness. "It's a long shot, small firms competing against companies with actual resources, but the project is for a neighborhood that needs it, designing spaces that serve people instead of profit margins. It's the kind of work I always wanted to do. Can I see?" She pulled out her sketches, watching his face as he studied them. His expression shifted from polite interest to genuine engagement, the way it used to when they talked about architecture in the library all those years ago. "This is brilliant," he said, tracing the lines of her community spaces design. "The way you've integrated green spaces with function, created privacy within openness. This deserves to win." Deserving and winning are different things. The firms with connections usually get these contracts. What if you had a connection? Vance Enterprises has been looking to diversify our portfolio, invest in community-focused developments. I could make an introduction. "No." Her voice was sharp, protective. "I won't get work because I'm the mother of your child. If I win this, it'll be on merit." He set the sketches down carefully, holding up his hands in surrender. "You're right. I'm sorry. Old habits, thinking I can fix things with money and connections. Some things can't be fixed that way. Some things have to be earned." "Like trust." "Like trust," she agreed. They sat in silence for a moment, sipping coffee, the weight of 5 years pressing down on the small table between them. Finally, Alistair spoke, his voice quiet but sincere. "I've been thinking a lot about what you've accomplished, raising Isaac alone, working those brutal shifts, keeping your skills sharp through freelance work, maintaining your dreams even when reality kept crushing them. You've done what I could never do, built something real from nothing. I did what I had to do, what any mother would do. No, not any mother. Some would have given up, let bitterness poison everything, raised a child who felt like a burden instead of a gift. You didn't do that. You raised an incredible kid who feels loved and secure and whole, despite everything he didn't have. That's not survival, Shonda. That's triumph." She felt tears threatening and fought them back. "He's worth it. He's worth everything. I know he is. But so are you. You're worth more than double shifts and second-hand furniture and postponing your life indefinitely. You've sacrificed so much, and I'm in awe of your strength." "Strength is just fear that's learned to function," she said quietly. "I was terrified every single day, terrified I'd fail him, that I'd made the wrong choice, that he'd grow up resenting me for keeping him from you. He could never resent you. Anyone can see how much you love him. Love isn't always enough. Sometimes kids need more than love. They need fathers, family, connections to where they come from." Alistair wrapped his hands around his coffee mug, gathering courage for words he needed to say clearly. "I need you to understand what I want, so there's no confusion or misread signals. I want to be an active father to Isaac. Not just weekend visits and birthday parties, but real involvement in his life. School meetings, doctor appointments, bedtime routines when you'll let me. The boring parts that actually matter, that's already happening. You've been consistent for 3 months now. I want more than co-parenting, though. He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. I want to build a life with you, Shonda. Not like before, not rushing into something without foundation, but slowly, carefully, proving through actions that I've changed, that I can be the partner you deserve and the father Isaac needs. That's easy to say when everything is going well. What happens when work gets demanding? When your father escalates his disapproval? When will the reality of blending our very different lives become harder than the romance of it? Then we'll deal with it, together, with honest communication instead of silence, with fights that we work through instead of running from. I can't promise perfect, Shonda, but I can promise a present, I can promise effort, and I can promise that I will never again choose my father's approval over my family. Family. She tested the word carefully. We're not a family yet, Alistair. We're two people co-parenting a child and trying to figure out if there's anything left of what we used to have. Then let me prove we can be a family. However long it takes, whatever tests you need me to pass. I'm not the scared kid who let his father control his life. I'm a man who lost everything that mattered and spent 5 years learning exactly how much I threw away. She set her coffee down, her hands trembling slightly. This moment felt enormous, the kind of decision that would ripple through years to come, shaping not just her life but Isaac's entire future. I'm not the same woman who left either. I've learned things about myself, about my strength, but also about my fears and how they can disguise themselves as wisdom. I ran because I was terrified, and I told myself it was to protect Isaac. Some of that was true, but some of it was protecting myself from being hurt again. You had every right to protect yourself, maybe, but I also deprived Isaac of a father and you of a son because I made assumptions instead of having one hard conversation. We both failed in different ways. The question is whether we can do better now. She pulled out her phone, opening her notes app where she'd been thinking about this, writing out conditions and crossing them out, building a framework for something she wasn't sure was possible. If we're going to try this, and I mean really try, not just see where it goes, I need absolute honesty. Even when the truth is uncomfortable, even when you think lying might protect me or avoid a fight, I need to know what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what pressures you're facing from your father or the company. I can do that. I need real communication, not you making decisions about what I can handle or what information I should have. We talk through problems. We don't retreat into silence or make unilateral choices that affect all of us. Agreed, if we struggle, when we struggle because blending a life after 5 years apart will be messy, we get professional help. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. No pride, no pretending we can handle everything alone. That makes sense. She looked up from her phone, meeting his eyes directly. Most importantly, so parenting stays the priority. Isaac's stability, his emotional health, his sense of security. Those come before romance, before our feelings, before anything else. If trying to be a couple starts damaging him, we pull back to just co-parenting, no questions asked. I wouldn't want it any other way. These aren't suggestions, Alistair. They're requirements. Non-negotiable terms for me, even considering letting you back into my life as more than Isaac's father. I understand, and I accept every condition. Your word is enough. If I can't trust your word, a piece of paper won't help anyway. The silence that followed felt different from earlier silences, charged with possibility rather than weighted with past failures. Alistair shifted in his chair, his hand moving across the table toward hers, but stopping short of actually touching, waiting for permission. "Can I hold your hand?" The question was so tentative, so respectful of her boundaries, that it nearly broke her. This was different from the Alistair who used to pull her into his arms without asking, confident in his welcome. This version asked, waited, and respected her right to say no. She placed her hand in his, feeling the familiar warmth, the way his fingers automatically intertwined with hers, like they'd never forgotten the pattern. 5 years dissolved in that touch, but simultaneously remained present. They weren't the same people who'd held hands in college, and that was perhaps for the best. "I've missed this," he said quietly. "Missed you, missed us. I've missed it too, even when I was angry, even when I convinced myself I was better off alone. May I kiss you?" Her heart hammered at the question, at the choice he was giving her, at the precipice they were standing on. Everything in her that had been hurt wanted to say no, to maintain safety, to avoid the risk of being destroyed again. But another part, the part that had loved him first and never completely stopped, wanted to know if that chemistry still existed, if 5 years and heartbreak had killed it, or if it had just been dormant, waiting. "Yes," she whispered. He stood slowly, moving around the small table, giving her time to change her mind. When he cupped her face in his hands, his touch was gentle, reverent, nothing like the passionate kisses of their youth. This kiss, when it came, was soft and questioning, full of promise rather than presumption. It lasted only a moment, but in that moment, Shonda felt the possibility of unfolding. Not certainty, there was too much history for certainty, but the genuine chance that maybe with work and honesty and time, they could build something stronger than what they'd lost. When they separated, she saw tears on his cheeks matching her own. "That's not a guarantee," she said, needing to be clear even as her heart raced. "That's just a willingness to see if this could work. That's all I'm asking for. A chance to prove we can do better this time. But let's be clear about something. This conversation, this kiss, this tentative agreement to try again, none of it erased the complications waiting outside Shonda's small apartment. Roland Vance wasn't going to suddenly embrace his grandson or approve of his son dating the woman he'd tried to eliminate years ago. The class differences that had strained their relationship before hadn't disappeared just because they'd both matured. Alistair would still face pressure from his family's social circle, from business associates who'd question his judgment, from a father who saw love as weakness and control as strength. Shonda would still struggle with feeling out of place in his world, with the financial disparities that made her uncomfortable, with the fear that history might repeat itself when pressures mounted. They'd have fights about parenting styles, about how to handle Roland's inevitable interference, about money and holidays, and whose traditions mattered more. Old patterns would try to reassert themselves, his tendency to make decisions unilaterally, her instinct to run when things got hard. Trust would take years to rebuild fully, and some scars would always remain tender. But here's what was different. They were facing these challenges as partners now, as parents who'd agreed that Isaac's well-being came first, as two people who'd learned the hard way that avoidance and assumption created more damage than difficult conversations ever could. They had tools now, therapy on the table, communication requirements, boundaries clearly stated. Most importantly, they had perspective. Alistair had lived 5 years without his son and knew exactly what choosing wrong looked like. Shonda had carried the weight of single parenting and understood that pride was expensive when paid for in her child's questions about his absent father. Neither would make their old mistakes lightly because they both knew the cost too intimately. So what can we learn from Shonda and Alistair's story? What truths emerge from the wreckage of their first attempt at love and the careful rebuilding of their second chance? First, understand that pride and fear are master disguises. They convinced Shonda that running away was protecting her child, when it was also protecting herself from potential rejection. They convinced Alistair that appeasing his father was strategic thinking, when it was just cowardice wearing a business suit. We tell ourselves stories about our motivations, dress up self-preservation as sacrifice, and genuinely believe we're doing the right thing when we're often just doing the safe thing. Second, one hard conversation can prevent years of pain. If Shonda had confronted Alistair about the pregnancy instead of running, if Alistair had stood up to his father instead of placating him, if either of them had chosen vulnerability over protection, Isaac might have grown up knowing both parents. 5 years of struggle and absence might never have happened. We avoid discomfort in the moment and create agony that stretches across years. Third, money and status mean absolutely nothing without integrity and authentic connection. Roland Vance has wealth most people can't comprehend, but he'll die surrounded by people who fear or need him rather than love him. Lorena had everything money could buy, but wrote letters wishing her son would choose love over legacy. Shonda's apartment cost less per month than Alistair spent on suits, but it held more genuine warmth than the Vance estate ever had. Buildings and bank accounts are just infrastructure. What you fill them with determines their actual value. Fourth, second chances aren't automatic, and they certainly aren't guaranteed. They must be earned through consistent change behavior over time. Alistair didn't get Shonda's willingness to try again because he said the right words or made grand gestures. He earned it by showing up every Saturday, by defending Isaac to his father, by respecting Shonda's boundaries, by proving through months of small actions that his transformation was real. Trust broken quickly takes years to rebuild, and that's appropriate. The shortcuts that destroyed it can't be the same path that repairs it. Finally, children deserve honesty appropriate to their age and development. Isaac had a right to know his father existed, to decide for himself whether that relationship mattered. Shonda's protection, while well-intentioned, made that choice for him. Alistair's absence, while not entirely his fault, deprived Isaac of half his heritage. Adults' egos and fears should never supersede children's needs for truth and connection. We don't have to explain everything in harsh detail, but we owe kids the foundational facts of their own existence. Remember how this story began? A single mother walked into her millionaire ex's mother's funeral holding the hand of a 5-year-old boy who looked exactly like him. Everyone stared. Whispers spread through the chapel like wildfire. A secret 5 years old was suddenly visible to everyone who'd once dismissed Shonda as unsuitable. But the real story was never about the scandal or the gossip or the shock value of the revelation. It was about a father meeting his son for the first time. About a man forced to confront his failures in the most public way possible. About a woman choosing to stop running and face the past she'd been hiding from. About a child who deserved better than the circumstances his parents' fears had created. That funeral became the turning point where everything changed, where Alistair saw what his weakness had cost him, where Shonda recognized that protection and avoidance weren't the same thing, where Isaac's existence demanded acknowledgement from everyone who'd rather pretend inconvenient truths didn't exist. Lorena's death, tragic as it was, gave them the collision that 5 years of separation had prevented. Sometimes it takes losing someone to realize what we've already lost and what we still have the chance to save. Now it's your turn to weigh in on this story. What do you think Shonda did right? She protected her son from a potentially toxic family environment, built a stable life on her own terms, and raised Isaac to be confident and kind. But she also made decisions based on overheard conversation rather than direct confrontation, deprived Isaac of his father for 5 years, and let fear guide her choices. What did she do wrong? And what about Alistair? Does his consistent effort over 3 months earn him a legitimate second chance, or is the 5-year absence too big to overcome? Wood, you have given him the opportunity to prove he'd changed, Or would you have kept your walls up permanently? These aren't easy questions with obvious answers. Real life rarely offers clear heroes and villains, just complicated people making imperfect choices with limited information and too much emotion. That's what makes stories like this worth exploring together. If you've watched this entire story, if you've felt Shonda's fear and Alistair's regret and Isaac's innocent hope, show that engagement by hitting the like button right now. Your likes tell us these deep, emotionally complex stories matter to you, that you want more content that treats relationships with the nuance they deserve, rather than reducing them to simple good versus evil narratives. Share this video with someone who's navigating co-parenting challenges, who's wondering if people truly can change, who's wrestling with whether to give someone a second chance or protect themselves from potential hurt. These conversations matter, and your sharing extends them beyond this comment section into living rooms and coffee shops and late-night phone calls, where real people need real wisdom. Subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories if you haven't already, and help us push beyond that 2,500 subscriber milestone. We're building a community that believes in honest storytelling, in exploring difficult topics without easy answers, in recognizing that most of us are doing our best with broken tools and imperfect information. Your subscription says you're part of that community. Drop a comment telling us second chance or move on. Tell us if you think Shonda and Alistair should keep building toward a future together, or if she should maintain strict co-parenting boundaries without romantic involvement. Your perspective matters, because it helps shape future stories and reminds everyone engaging with this content that they're not alone in facing these impossible choices. Shonda and Alistair's story reminds us that we can't rewrite our first chapters. The mistakes are permanent, recorded in the unchangeable past. But we absolutely can decide how the next chapters are written. We can choose honesty over avoidance, communication over silence, effort over convenience. We can earn back trust through consistent action. We can build new foundations on the ruins of old relationships. We can give our children better than what our fears would have allowed. None of it is easy. All of it requires courage, vulnerability, and the willingness to risk being hurt in service of something greater than self-protection. But the alternative, staying safe and separate, letting fear write the ending, that's not really safety at all. It's just a different kind of loss. Thank you for spending this time with Isaac, Shonda, and Alistair. Thank you for caring about their story enough to watch until the end. Keep showing up for the people who matter. Keep choosing courage over comfort, and keep believing that second chances, when genuinely earned, are worth the risk. This is Mr. Steele Rich Stories, where we explore the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of human connection. Until next time.